Second one is for Dr. Robert Zobel from FHWA. He's going to talk to us about the long-term preservation program.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I would be remiss if I did not thank the partnership right off the bat for allowing us the opportunity to come and talk with you about the long-term bridge performance program. It was kind of a last-minute thing for us to get on the agenda, and we very much appreciate the opportunity. What I'm going to talk about today is the long-term bridge performance program. Quick question. How many folks in here, I have a couple of questions. How many folks in here, it's probably easier for me to ask the negative, have not heard of the LTBP program? Okay, so everybody's heard of it. How many folks in here have not heard of LTBP's bridge portal? Okay, so a few people haven't heard of that, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And you can actually see a couple of the screen splashes up here on this first page, and for those of you who are familiar with LTBP's bridge portal, it might look a little bit different to you here, and so I will talk about that. The long-term bridge performance program, what we're really all about is getting out there and collecting bridge performance related data on a subset of bridges nationally. The real idea behind it is to improve our understanding of bridge performance, improve our understanding of construction preservation practices, to get a little better understanding and to know what's really the proper thing to do. Improved condition forecasting and life cycle analysis, and leading to data-driven decisions. We're really all about data. What we need is more data. I know that some of you may have been in the room this morning when Dr. Moon was talking about both a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach for assessing data for the purposes of bridge performance. LTBP is actually involved in both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. We do recognize fully that it has taken some time for us to gear up and get going with our data collection. I'm going to talk a little bit about the data that we've collected to date. I'm also going to talk about the plans that we have to accelerate that data collection on more of a national basis. So that's primarily the things that I'm going to discuss today. The current program focus, although in the past we've been involved in collecting bridge performance related data and performing various types of analysis with that data and developing various tools utilizing that data, our primary focus right now, and probably for the next couple of years, is going to be on collecting data. So that's primarily what you'll see here. So as far as data collection for the program, I'm going to take just a couple of minutes out and talk about, from a research standpoint, the methodology that we're using within the program. And what you can see here, without diving into a lot of details on how we developed this methodology, essentially what we did was we looked at, across the board, the entire country, the population of different types of bridges throughout the country, and we determined what the bread and butter type of bridges are and where they were really concentrated. So we ended up essentially with three bridge types: pre-stressed concrete multi-girder, steel multi-girder, and concrete box girder, which you can see here in various colors. What we did was then to identify within specific environmental zones clusters of each of those bridges. And the idea is, within a cluster, within a single bridge cluster that's all one bridge type, that essentially what we have is within the cluster we have a specific environment. There are some microclimates that we tend to see within some of these clusters, varied truck traffic, and a single bridge type. And the approach to collecting data here, it's a multi-tiered approach. When we have a cluster of bridges, there may be within a radius of, say, 300 miles or so, we may find that we identify several thousand bridges of a particular type. For those several thousand bridges, we take a subset of those bridges that we call candidate bridges. We take a look at NBI, NBE, and what we call legacy data mining, which I'll talk a little bit about. The idea there is to see if we're able to answer any of the questions that the program has posed utilizing already existing data. We then, from those candidate bridges, which is kind of what you see here, we take a smaller subset, which are cluster bridges. And then we take an even smaller subset of the cluster bridges, which we call reference bridges. For the cluster bridges, we're going out and we're performing various non-destructive evaluation tests, primarily on the bridge deck at this point. That's what we're concentrating on. And within a cluster, we may have anywhere from maybe 45 to 60 cluster bridges, again, bridges of one particular type. And within that cluster, we may have anywhere from 2 to 4 what we call reference bridges. The reference bridges are those that we're going out, we're instrumenting, we're characterizing the loads, the distribution of loads, we're characterizing the truck traffic on those bridges. So essentially, we're trying to render those reference bridges as transparent. In other words, to know as much as we possibly can about them. The idea then is, where we have a reference bridge, where we know lots of information about it, is to try to correlate the performance of the reference bridge back to the cluster bridges, and to correlate cluster bridges back to candidate bridges, and then, if you will, between clusters of similar types of bridges in different environmental zones, or even clusters of bridges of different types. So that's the approach that we're taking, and it's beneficial to kind of understand that approach as I talk about the data collection activities. Early on in the program, we identified, I think it was 22 or 23 high priority performance areas. We got together with, I think it was 15 state DOTs and some other folks in the bridge community. Early on, we identified, as I said, 22, 23 different high priority items. We then prioritized those down to 6 high priority performance areas. Maybe I can remember what they are. Untreated bridge decks, treated bridge decks, coatings on steel superstructures, embedded pre-stressing strands, condition of bearings and of joints. So those are the 6 high priority performance areas. Obviously, we can't address all of them at one time. What we're planning to do right now is really concentrating on the untreated bridge decks. And while we're out assessing untreated bridge decks, we're going to do our best also to take a look at the joints in the deck, and if possible, without extensive resources, is to potentially be able to look at the bearings at the same time. So essentially what we're doing is, for the reference bridges, we're performing a detailed hands-on visual inspection. So it's an enhanced visual inspection above and beyond what's normally done every 2 years on all of our bridges. As far as non-destructive evaluation, some of you have probably heard of or seen the rabbit that was developed in conjunction with Rutgers University. We're in the process now of acquiring 4 of the commercialized editions of the rabbit, and the various technologies that are deployed on that rabbit are ground penetrating radar. You've probably heard a lot about many of these methods, so I'm not really going to go into any detail on them. So we're utilizing GPR, impact echo, ultrasonic surface waves, and electrical resistivity, really the purpose of which is to characterize the potential corrosive environment, to characterize delaminations, but not from the same perspective as what the states would typically want to see, such as what you were just talking about a few minutes ago, with trying to get a good handle on quantities that you would need to then put out for bid for repair. That's not what LTBP is about. We're about research and trying to understand the inception of when that deterioration occurs and what causes it and how it progresses. So it's a little bit different focus. In addition, deck imaging and automated surface crack mapping. On reference bridges, as I said, instrumentation, weigh and motion. We're looking at a couple of different weigh and motion systems. The purpose of that really is to be able to characterize the actual truckloads that the reference bridges actually see. In addition, we're performing some material sampling on various bridges. As the material sampling is approved by the owner, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get folks to let us to take cores out of the bridge all over the place. So we have to be very careful about that. As far as the data collection is concerned for the program, we do have a published report where we have 51 protocols. We have more than 130 that are in draft format, and we're working on additional ones currently. The main reason for having very specific protocols is so that we can ensure consistency in data collection, processing, and storage of the data. We can't just take data from anywhere, and then in terms of the correlation I was talking about earlier within a cluster, the candidate bridges, the cluster bridges, the reference bridges, if we obtain data, for instance, from a university researcher or from a state that may have collected that data on a similar type of bridge, but may not have collected it utilizing the program protocols, we may not have consistency in that data. So we have to be very careful about that. And that's the main reason why we have developed and continue to develop protocols. In fact, currently, we're working on protocol development for instrumentation plans for our reference bridges, for weigh and motion, for things of that nature, detailing specifically for the reference bridges. I will talk a little bit in a few minutes about some of the things that we're getting ready to do very soon as far as data collection. Now, to date, various data collection that has been performed in the Mid-Atlantic, we have the blue clusters are pre-stressed concrete, the red ones are steel multi-girder, and the white are box beam. These over here are cast-in-place post-tension box beam. These two here are adjacent pre-stressed, precast box beam structures. So in the Mid-Atlantic, we actually have completed 3 rounds of testing on 12 bridges each in 2 clusters, so 24 bridges of multi-girder, pre-stressed and multi-girder steel. In the Gulf, we also have 24 bridges. Up here, I should mention here, the 3 rounds of data collection, the first 2 rounds of data collection in the Mid-Atlantic consisted of the enhanced visual inspection, handheld NDE for the first round of data collection, and then NDE for the second round of data collection using the Rabbit prototype. And the third round of data collection, we actually utilized both the Rabbit prototype and the first of the Rabbit CEs to get it out there in the field and to kind of do some comparisons between the prototype and the commercialized edition of the Rabbit. We initiated data collection a number of years ago in the Mid-Atlantic, which is why we've been able to get 3 rounds of data collection there as opposed to some of these other locations. Down in the Gulf, we have 2 clusters, steel and pre-stressed concrete, a total of 12 bridges in each one. We've done the enhanced visual inspection and material sampling on some of those bridges. In the Northwest, we had 12 bridges that we've done the enhanced visual inspection on. Same for the Southwest cluster, but also up in the Northwest, I think we did 7 additional bridges using the Rabbit prototype. We had sent it out there for data collection, and also there was, I think this was probably 2 years ago, there was an ASCE conference out there and it was showcased at the conference, so we kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone on that one. But this is essentially where we stand as far as data collection currently. The direction we're moving, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but since I have this up here, it's worthwhile to talk about it. The direction that we're moving in the very near future, we have some delays with the acquisition of the 4 Rabbits. But we do have our data collection contractor. That contract was awarded a couple of months ago. We want to get them started. So they're actually going to get started utilizing handheld NDE in these two clusters and also up in this cluster, revisiting bridges that we've already been to one time. Should the rabbits be delivered while they're continuing the work on, I believe it's 38 bridges within these three clusters, should the rabbits get delivered while we're out there performing the data collection with handheld, we'll just switch over and start utilizing the commercialized editions of the rabbit. I want to talk a little bit about legacy data mining and what I mean by that. The idea behind it is for all of those candidate bridges for a particular cluster, we have gone out to the individual states. We've collected documentation, bridge plans, specifications, pretty much anything we can get our hands on. And the idea is to extract data that is not otherwise available to us. As an example, for a multi-girder precast, pre-stressed cluster, for bridges within there from the NBI, we can't get information pertaining for a particular bridge. The deck thickness, the girder spacing, really diving down into the details. We can't get that kind of information from NBI, so we're collecting all of the documentation and extracting that information, and we're storing that information for each of the candidate bridges within what I will still call the bridge portal. For every single bridge that we collect or gather documentation on, we're pulling out somewhere around 350 data items for every single bridge. And all of that information, well, I shouldn't say all of that, a good portion of that information is fully searchable within the bridge portal. We'll move on to talking about data management and the bridge portal. For those of you who aren't familiar with the bridge portal, the idea behind it is to have a centralized national level repository for efficiently and quickly accessing and querying bridge performance related data and information. So that doesn't mean just NBI or NBE, that's also weather data, that's also data that's collected by the program. All of this combined with data-driven deterioration modeling, GIS mapping capabilities, and other data and statistical analysis tools. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the bridge portal, when we initially deployed the portal several years back, I think it was maybe it was in 2015, it was a long process at FHWA to get the bridge portal up and available not only to folks internally at FHWA, but generally to the public. Currently, it is behind a firewall at FHWA, and that has caused a lot of issues with access, which is completely understandable. It was very early on in the development of the portal. Somebody saw, oh, well, you're going to have potentially bridge plans on there, which we don't have on there, but NBI, all kinds of information about bridges. Well, that's going to give terrorists information at their fingertips. And my point was you could get all of that information at that time right off of the internet. So I'm not really sure why we ended up in that direction other than the potential for security issues. However, we are now in the process, right now, we have rebranded the bridge portal to InfoBridge. Currently, InfoPave is the long-term pavement performance program's data warehouse, if you will. Several months ago, the long-term pavement performance program and long-term bridge performance program were brought under one team, and we're together now to hopefully be able to see some efficiencies and synergies between the two programs. This is one of them. The idea is eventually we will have a overarching site called InfoHighway, which will have InfoPave and InfoBridge, potentially down the road. Info hydraulics, some of the other areas that we might be able to bring into Info Highway. So that's the direction that we're heading. We are hoping that within the next month's time or so, that we'll have a preview of InfoBridge up on the cloud available to everyone. We will have the official rollout of InfoBridge next year at TRB. But between now and TRB, we're still going through some of the internal processes for security clearance, for putting this on the cloud and so on. So we will be providing it as a preview until we have the full rollout at TRB next year, but that preview won't be available maybe for another 4 to 6 weeks or so. As far as the data that's currently available within InfoBridge, and it's very hard for me to say InfoBridge because I have Bridge Portal ingrained on my mind, so forgive me if I go back and forth between them. As far as LTBP data, for reference bridges, NDE data, hands-on visual inspection, material sampling, legacy data mining. For cluster bridges, NDE data, legacy data mining. We have NBI back to 1983, up through 2016. 2017 was just made available, and we're going to be working towards getting the 2017 NBI and accompanying NBE up into the bridge portal. We have some National Bridge Element data currently within, and I just said the bridge portal, within InfoBridge. We have the framework to accept National Bridge Element data into the database. So as that information is submitted to federal highways and the data is validated, we then bring it into InfoBridge, as well as it's also specifically NBI and NBE are also available directly through FHWA. Also, environmental data currently we have for each of the bridges, number of snowfalls, number of freeze-thaw cycles. I would say the near future, we'll probably be changing that a little bit because the long-term pavement performance program utilizes a different national data set that's a much, much more extensive data set, and we will probably tag on what they're doing with environmental data. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick preview, some of the screen images from InfoBridge. If you've seen the bridge portal, it hasn't changed a whole lot, but a little bit. And as I said, the idea is before the official rollout next January at TRB, we're providing this as a preview, and we're hoping that it's going to be available within the next month or so. So that's the opening splash screen, and I'll just describe some of the things that I'm showing here. So the larger screen in the back is the advanced search or query capabilities, and you can see over on the left, these are a lot of the items that are in NBI. If you don't remember the number, or if you do remember the number, you can type the number. If you sort of know the name of it, you can start typing the name and it'll show up. So it's very intuitive. At the bottom of that list, there's a lot more data that's not just NBI or NBE. In this instance, one of the things that I chose to search for is LTBP testing. And in this case, what I included was the Mid-Atlantic, the Gulf region, the Southwest, and the Northwest, which you can see right here. And when you run that query, this is the GIS part of the application that actually plots each one of those bridges on screen. Now, if you clicked on one of those bridges, it would bring you to this other screen here, which is essentially a summary for that one individual bridge. And the first tab for that is summary. It's got all of your NBI information. Down further, it's got inspection information. It gives you a quick map of the location of the bridge. If you look at LTBP data tab, I'm not going through every one of these, but if you look at the LTBP data tab for this bridge, we have, for those bridges where we have data, we have both raw data and we have processed data that's in a report format, and you can simply download them as a researcher if you're interested in the raw data and perhaps processing it in a different fashion than we have, you have the ability to do that by downloading that data. Additionally, as far as any of the report type of formats, and you download those, this is the type of thing that you'll see with the visual inspection report. These are some of the results from the various NDE assessments that were performed. And it's really hard for me to read the dates on those, but it all shows up in that table for an individual bridge. Also, in terms of the legacy data mining that I was talking about, we performed legacy data mining for untreated bridge decks. We're going to be getting started as a proactive measure on the legacy data mining for treated bridge decks, but we have actually performed the legacy data mining on approximately 1,600 bridges with untreated bridge decks. What's currently in InfoBridge are 1,200 of the 1,600 bridges. There are an additional 400 that we have a little bit more work on extracting data from before we put it up into the database. And to give you an idea, some of the extracted legacy data mining, it's searchable. So as an example, and it's very difficult to read what's up here. I'll talk about some of what's up here, but just as an example of one of the things that you might be able to do with the Bridge portal utilizing the legacy data mining. If you wanted to maybe gain a little better understanding of the influence of girder spacing and deck thickness, you could perform a search that says, I want to look at all of the bridges of a certain type, if you want to do it that way, that has a deck thickness, say, between 8 and 12 inches, and has a girder spacing maybe between, just throwing some numbers out there, between 7 and 9 feet. So you can start to perform these types of analyses and look at NBI condition ratings, potentially even look at some of the LTBP data for some of those bridges. But this is something that we've never been able to do before because that data was never in that kind of format for us to be able to search it. So just very quickly, what you see here, that's information pertaining to the deck. It gives you information as far as reinforcement size, whether the direction that it is, whether it's a top bar, bottom bar, and so on. So it gives a lot of information that we didn't have before. Girder information, here it's telling us for pre-tension, the type of girder, the girder spacing, and so on. There's also information pertaining specifically to reinforcement for that girder. If it's pre-stressed girder, it provides information pertaining to the pre-stressing reinforcement, shear reinforcement, and so on. So there's a lot of information available in there. As far as data modeling within InfoBridge, currently we have deterioration modeling with user-defined model parameters. What's being shown here is a Markovian distribution. We also have within InfoBridge what we're terming a life expectancy model. And what this actually does is, if you were in the room this morning when Dr. Moon was talking about that bottom-up approach, this is actually utilizing NDE data to sort of correct the deterioration curve. So you can actually enter in NDE data in here, and you can see here the forecast is adjusted based on NDE data. And for the data that I placed in here for this particular bridge, you can see how the forecast changed from here all the way over to here just based on the correction utilizing that NDT data. So as far as the next steps for the program, field data collection, I already talked a little bit about this. Because of the delays that we have currently, we're getting started on field data collection in 3 clusters using handheld NDE. At the same time, 3 of the steel bridges, as sort of a pilot, we're going to be looking at the use of UAS on those 3 bridges to see how it may be able to augment our data collection capabilities. Rabbit CE data collection, that is slated for the fall of 2018. We should be receiving the units over the summer, then we have to train our data collection contractor, so it's going to take a little bit of time to get those out into the field. Pooled fund study, the influence of vehicular live loads on bridge performance. Currently, we have 2 bridges instrumented, with a 3rd one planned to be instrumented. Strategic research matrices, for those of you who are familiar with LTBP, they, a long time ago, developed more or less what they now call their data analysis plan. It was what they called originally the LTBP tablecloth. It was really looking at least for LTBP, it's looking at what research is currently being performed, what are the gaps in that research pertaining to bridge performance. The purpose being the development of these strategic research matrices to allow us from a programmatic standpoint to better understand whether there are gaps in research that is currently being performed or planned to be performed. So it's programmatic, really for us it's more of a programmatic planning tool. We're also in the process of developing a technical paper competition that would be based on utilizing LTBP data. We're also in the process right now of preparing a combined strategic plan for long-term infrastructure, the long-term infrastructure programs, meaning long-term pavement performance and long-term bridge performance. And as I also talked about, the cloud deployment of InfraBridge. So this is really a good picture of what you should expect to see over the next year's time with LTBP for this initial data collection using handheld. I think we're looking at somewhere around 38 bridges, and almost all of those bridges are bridges that we have already been to one time in the Northwest or in those Gulf clusters.
A lot of us states are going through a little exercise that we're, for the Federal Highway Administration, called the Transportation Asset Management Plan. And part of that is doing life cycle cost analysis. Now in Florida, we started developing deterioration curves a long time ago. We actually have a tool that we can use that we've developed. But I know that a lot of the states don't have that tool. It looks like these clusters are the perfect opportunity to do that if you could match yourself into a cluster. Of course, it's being worked out now by AASHTO BRM. Is this something that is going to be used by AASHTO BRM? Is this something that's going to help refine this model?
The idea is not to refine AASHTO BRM. A couple of things I'd like to talk about with this. It's probably going to be a little bit of time for LTBP before we really start doing a lot of work in this area, because what we really need more than anything is sound quality data. We don't have enough data at this point to develop reliable deterioration models. So our first and foremost priority, probably over the next couple of years, is really going to be collecting data to support the development of data-driven deterioration models. So I think it is in the future. It's not going to be in our immediate future because we really need to get data.
Well, I think it really needs to be, because basically this is a requirement by FHWA, and using this stuff to basically determine, you know, cost comparisons for maintenance, also to determine funding levels and things of that nature is going to be kind of important. And this could obviously even be used down the road if you extrapolate it out to producing, in terms of the risk management of doing some type of probabilities in terms of things that basically can occur, because you got collecting data on weather and everything else. If you stop to think about it, the Gulf states could sustain certain attacks due to hurricanes that might be bridge-killing wave, vulnerability attacks. All this sort of stuff could be worked into that long term. I hope that you guys are thinking of this long term.
We are absolutely thinking of those kind of things long term. However, and to kind of repeat myself, the main focus at this point in time really needs to be data collection, because without the data, it's very difficult to even imagine developing any type of deterioration forecasting that would be reliable.
You said the InfoBridge would be available in the next couple of months. Will that be, just go to the LTBP website and find it, or?
No, we will disseminate that information as best we can through, likely through our state coordinators group, and then that information would
Okay.
then trickle down
Okay.
from the state coordinators. For those of you that aren't aware, the LTBP program, we have a group that we call our state coordinators. We have essentially one individual from the DOT in each of the I should say, 50 states and Puerto Rico that we work together with to help disseminate information from the program. So that is likely the way that you'll get that information. It would also be posted on LTBP's website, I would imagine. But we'll get the information out as soon as it's available. I promise that
Sure,
that
I
information
understand.
will come out.
If I may, one follow-up. Will there be a state coordinators meeting in 2018?
Of that, I was asked the same question just recently. I don't have an answer right now. You know, we are up against some constraints with our resources. We're looking at different ways that we can do this. Some ideas have been floated that perhaps we do this at TRB, perhaps we do it every other year, perhaps if we do it every other year, that in the interim and the in-between years, we can hold webinars for that. So the decision just simply hasn't been made yet. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.